course consists of 36 lectures on 30 masterpieces of the ancient art, filmed with you lecturing and the works being shown in varied ways. What was the purpose of this course, and what is your target audience?
This course is one that I have wanted to teach for a long time, and it's different from any that I've seen before because we take objects of art from all around the world and really concentrate on ancient times. When you take an art survey course today, usually they give ancient art short shrift. But in order to really understand modern, contemporary art, or even art from the Renaissance, you have to understand what came before. And you have to go back a long way, 35,000 years, to the beginning of art and to the beginning of complex societies, the emergence of art in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in other places, in order to understand the diversity, this incredible complexity of human expression. And I wanted to do it in a way in which I was a personal guide to the students, taking them from object to object. And with each object, and these are masterpieces, as I call them, objects of surpassing beauty and significance in the culture, I set it in context. And I talk about the culture that produced it, what it meant, and there are a lot of hidden meanings and things that aren't understood about things like, say, the ram in a thicket from the cemetery at Ur, which is a gold lapis lazuli and shell a goat actually standing on its hind legs. And it's really a metaphor for fertility and other things. And you need someone to really explain that to you. And the reason I wanted to teach this course was also to compare different cultures. They're very different in style in terms of the art that they develop, but many of the themes are similar and many of the concerns in emerging societies are similar too. So that's really what I was trying to do, to show students. And students could be people at BC. This course could be for them, and I hope to create a course based on this. And also doctors, lawyers, educated people with an interest in art, retirees, but who have never spent any time really examining ancient art. Usually you look at some Greek art, you look at Discobolus or the Column of Trajan, which I look at too, but you don't set them within the context of what came before. And I think it's important for people to understand also that humans were not the focus of art prior to the Greeks, really, and I look at a lot of animal art and things of that nature, especially in Chauvet, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and so forth.
What are some of the overarching themes of the course?
Well, there are a lot of themes, but when you begin at the beginning with Chauvet Cave, for instance, and with the emergence of these societies in Mesopotamia and Egypt, the first concern is one of survival and fertility and reproduction. And I don't mean just reproduction of humans, but of animals and plants. So that theme of abundance, of being able to survive with enough goods from the land, comes up. It crops up in many different ways. And we see it, for instance, in cave painting, of course, this the dominance of animals has something to do with the natural world in which people live and where they need to find their sustenance. But when you go to narrative art, which begins in Mesopotamia at Uruk, you start to see an ordered universe where people are looking at their means of sustenance, the beginning of farming, the beginning of domestication of animals. And that's what's actually shown on a lot of the art. So we see, for instance, in the Royal Standard of Ur from the Royal Cemetery at Ur, which we don't know whether it's royal or not, but it's just called that, we see abundance and goods from the land being brought to the ruler. And that brings me to the other important theme, which is rulership. What does a ruler do in society? The art that was developing here not only helped people to maintain their lives and to reproduce, but to organize a society in a certain way. And the art was part and parcel of that. A lot of the art is part of the religion and the rulership of the society. So we see in the Standard of Ur that the king or ruler is seated at the top, receiving the abundance of the land. And he's placed himself in such a way that he is not only an intercessor between the divine and the people, but he also makes that abundance come to his city-state generally. And that's really important. So the most important theme really is that most of the art we're looking at is part of the sacred realm. And if it's not entirely sacred, it's part of the rulership theme. And the rulership is often placed within the religious aspect of the society. So this is very different from modern art, where we don't think about religion anymore. But all this art had a real role to play in developing the society. So that those two, fertility and rulership, are very important. We have the ram in a thicket, the goat, which is a fertility symbol. We have the queen of the night from Babylon, who is probably the goddess Ishtar, and she's the goddess who's responsible for reproduction and fertility of all things, not just people. And we also have humans placed within a cosmic a cosmos, really. A diagram of the universe is made in some of these artworks, and one that might be related to calendrics and the sun and the moon and so forth. The best example of that, of course, is the Aztec calendar stone, which I discuss, and that gives a really good picture of an ordered world where the Aztecs believed in creation and destruction over the millennia, and they gave actual calendar dates there. And that is one of the most amazing artworks from the Aztec culture, or from any culture, in fact. If you go back 4,000 years, you see things like that in the emerging societies in Mesopotamia. At Uruk, you have the Uruk vase, which shows us the water upon which all society rests, all life rests, the fertile wheat and grain which they began to farm, and then above that the livestock, above that the priests, and at the very top of the vase we have the goddess Inanna, or Ishtar, who is the goddess of fertility, receiving the goods from the king. So this notion of an ordered universe is shown in almost every way. Another aspect, another theme we have in these artworks, which I chose, is visual propaganda for the state and for the ruler. So the ruler places himself in the middle, for instance, with the Maya king Pakal, the ruler Pakal, the Great, from the city-state of Palenque around 700, a little before 700 A.D. In his sarcophagus cover, he is reborn as a maize deity after death, and also as the sun, and he places himself in the center of the cosmos. So it's interesting to see how rulers are always portraying themselves as central in the cosmos and in the society. And things don't seem to be able to go on without them, thanks to the art. And this is true of Assyrian kings as well. Another aspect is that these artworks show what each society valued, and that's different in each one. So, for instance, in the Andes, we have weavings. Textiles are considered the most important of artworks, the most prized goods. And the artwork within those textiles that's woven in them is often abstract and has to do with supernatural creatures. So we see a different emphasis there than we do, for instance, in the statue of Discobolus, where the Greeks are putting a lot of emphasis on the perfection of the human body. So those are as different as you could imagine, and I really enjoyed comparing them.
Was it difficult to narrow down your list to 30 masterpieces? How did you decide what to include? And what is the range of masterpieces in terms of time and space that you explore?
Well, it was difficult to narrow it down, of course, and the secret is that I threw in a few extra there. And, of course, when I talk about particular masterpieces, I do compare them to others. So there are many more art objects or sites or cultural artifacts that I bring in. So in that respect, I cheated a bit by adding more than 30. But it was difficult in some respects because there's so much wonderful expression of an artwork out there. But I wanted to keep it limited to things that I could compare that demonstrated a bit of these themes that I mentioned earlier. And also, I wanted to highlight certain cultures that are lesser known and compare them to some better known works. So my expertise is in Mesopotamia and Egypt. So I have a great many objects from there, and particularly Mesopotamia, because I thought people didn't know some of the greatest works and some of the most interesting and earliest works, like the first works of narrative art from Uruk and the first works from the city-states that involved mosaics and so forth. And all of that begins in Mesopotamia. I, of course, looked at Egypt to compare to Mesopotamia because people love it. And when we look at an object like Tutankhamun's mask, which is so famous, I wanted to have people examine it in a different way to understand it within the context of Amarna art and why it's part of an incredible new approach to the art within this 3,000-year tradition of Egyptian art. So those were the things I was very interested in, along with, of course, the art of the ancient Americas, which I teach here at BC, and which I think are very underappreciated. We used to call it pre-Columbian art when I studied it, but now it's the art that existed here in the Americas before contact with Europe. And in between, I wanted to show things from a very wide range of objects, and things that I was also able to talk about, like Chinese bronzes that are so abstract and involve so many animal shapes. I wanted to cover India and Borobudur, the stupas there, the Buddhist stupas, and see how they compare, for instance, to ziggurats in Mesopotamia. So all of these things relate to one another in a way, and I wanted to get a range of objects, different kinds of objects in different medium, and that includes weaving, pottery, metalwork, stone, of course. We don't have a lot of wood because it didn't survive. And I tried to include most continents. We go from France, from Chauvet, from the earliest cave art, painting, to Mesopotamia, to Egypt, and on to India, to Indonesia, to China, and then to the Americas, to Central America, to Mexico, the Maya, the Aztec, and of course the Olmec who preceded them. And then we go down to the Andes, the Andean realm, which is very much less explored by people who study art today. So I wanted to really cover a lot of ground and a lot of time, too. So I'm starting at 35,000 BC, the Aurignacian period for the Paleolithic art, jumping to around 4,000 to 3,000 BC in Mesopotamia and Egypt. And then with the Americas, because they start human settlement much later than the Old World, we really go till the time of Western contact, which is around 1500.
Did you travel to many of the locations that you describe in your course? And do you have a personal history with many of these works?
Yes, I certainly did, and that's how I got started in this field. When I was 6, my family drove from New York to Mexico and Mexico City, and we saw the site of Teotihuacan outside of Mexico City being excavated. And that's when I decided that I would be an archaeologist and art historian and investigate this area. So Teotihuacan is in there, of course. And later on, I got very interested in Egyptian art, and I actually interned in high school at the Metropolitan Museum, so I got to know a lot of the objects there, and I worked later on in graduate school in the Metropolitan Museum's Ancient Near Eastern department. And then, of course, here at the MFA, I give semester courses, so I'm very familiar with museum holdings, and many of those appear in the course. Now, as far as travel goes, I've traveled around the world to many of these sites, and I actually lived in Indonesia, in Jakarta, as a Henry Luce scholar right after I graduated from college. And that's when I got to know Borobudur and Indonesian art from a wide range of eras, and to appreciate Buddhist art and also the art of China and Southeast Asia. I had a history with Chinese bronzes as well. I studied them as an undergraduate and worked for the Arthur M. Sackler Foundation, and we handled these unbelievable, wonderful bronzes that were collected in the United States, and then I got to see those in Asia as well. And I wanted to include those because I think they're very underappreciated by the general public. As far as the ancient Americas go, I've traveled to almost every major archaeological site in Mexico, Central America, and South America. There are a few I haven't gotten to yet, but many of the photos you see in the course are ones that I took, and I always use my own photos for my course here at Boston College as well. So I'm intimately familiar with a lot of these things, and they're things that resonate. They resonated with me even as a child, many of them, and certainly as a young person, and I'm hoping that the audience for this course, whether undergraduates or 80-year-old retirees, find something fascinating that resonates for them and that makes them understand and perhaps in some respects really appreciate the diversity of human skill, of human endeavor, and of human expression in art. And that's really why I did this course.